They said he looked normal, polite, soft-spoken, the kind of man who'd help you carry groceries. But behind that shy smile was something else entirely. Before we begin, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more true crime stories that explore what happens when the human mind turns dark. It was Plainfield, Wisconsin. A small farming town where everyone knew everyone. In the late 1940s, Ed Gein was known as a quiet handyman, always willing to fix a fence, clear a field, or lend a hand at the hardware store. His eyes seemed kind, almost innocent. Few noticed how empty they really were. At night, his old farmhouse sat alone under the moonlight, creaking wood, flickering lamps, and silence heavy enough to breathe. Inside, Ed kept his mother's chair untouched, her Bible open, her room locked like a shrine. She was a saint, he'd whisper, his voice trembling. The only woman who never lied. But that devotion had turned into something darker, an obsession that blurred love and fear, faith and madness. Because when Augusta Gein died, something inside her son never stopped hearing her voice. And soon, he'd start bringing her back, piece by piece. Ed was born in 1906, on a cold Wisconsin winter morning, to a father who drank and a mother who preached fire. His mother, Augusta, ruled their world with a Bible in one hand and judgment in the other. She said women were the devil's trap, Ed once told investigators. Except her. In that small farmhouse, there was no laughter, no friends, no freedom. His mother forbade him from talking to girls, watching movies, or even visiting town alone. She believed Plainfield was a pit of sin, and she was God's messenger sent to keep her son pure. When his father died, Ed barely blinked. When his brother Henry started questioning Augusta's sermons, a brush fire took him too, conveniently, with Ed nearby. Locals whispered, but no one proved a thing. After that, it was just Ed and his mother. She became everything, his teacher, his church, his world. And when she finally died in 1945, Ed didn't just lose a parent. He lost reality itself. He spent days in her empty room, breathing in her scent, talking to her as if she'd never left. "Ma," he whispered into the silence. "I'll make sure you're never alone again." And he meant it. After Augusta's death, the farmhouse decayed, and so did Ed. Dust thickened on her Bible, dishes piled in the sink, and newspapers yellowed across the floor. But inside his mind, her voice still echoed. "She's watching," he'd whisper. "She knows." At first, people thought Ed was harmless, the quiet man who read pulp magazines and anatomy books at the diner. But those books weren't just stories. They were guides. Grave robbing, body preservation, skincraft, they fascinated him. He began visiting cemeteries at night, lantern in hand. He claimed the moonlight called him. There, he'd dig shallow graves, not for cruelty, but for comfort. He said he only took what he needed. A face. A piece of skin. Something to make his mother feel close again. Neighbors noticed the smell around his house, like bad meat, someone said. Ed laughed it off. "Just a deer I butchered," he'd reply softly. But in that cluttered kitchen, he was building something, sewing, shaping, collecting. Not for violence, but for love twisted beyond recognition. In his mind, he wasn't desecrating graves. He was rebuilding a home. And soon, he'd need fresher material. Winter 1954. Snow muffled the fields of Plainfield, and the world seemed asleep. But in Ed's mind, the voices were wide awake. His obsession had grown restless. Grave dirt no longer satisfied him, the skin too dry, the eyes too hollow. He needed warmth. Breath. Life. Mary Hogan, a local tavern owner, was bold and loud, everything Augusta wasn't. Ed would sit at her counter, smiling faintly, watching her hands move. To him, she was sinful and sacred all at once. "She talked too much," he told police later. "But she reminded me of Ma." One December night, the bar was empty. The next morning, it was painted in silence and blood. Only one bullet casing remained on the floor, and Mary was gone. People whispered that she'd left town. Others joked that Ed probably had her stuffed in his freezer. He chuckled when they said it. "She's not missing," he murmured once. "She's just home." But behind those locked farmhouse doors, a new figure sat in his mother's chair, lifeless, but dressed just right. And Ed felt calm again. For a while. Because soon, the town's other matron, Bernice Wardens, would catch his eye. By 1957, Ed Gein had become the town's harmless oddball, a loner who fixed engines, babysat for neighbors, and smiled politely at church. No one feared him. They pitied him. He'd show up at the hardware store where Bernice Wardens worked, asking about antifreeze, nails, or kerosene. Always gentle, always soft-spoken. Bernice once told a friend, "He's strange, but harmless." That's how Plainfield saw him, a man still grieving his mother, lost but kind. But inside his house, beneath nailed curtains and the steady hum of a freezer, another life existed. He'd built masks, made of real faces. He'd stitched together vests, gloves, and belts, shaping them into something like a second skin. He wasn't pretending to be a monster. He was pretending to be her, Augusta. When he wore those pieces, he said he felt whole. Like she was inside him again. On November 16, 1957, Ed visited the hardware store once more. He smiled as he wrote his name in Bernice's sales ledger, the last entry she'd ever make. By sundown, she was gone. And Plainfield's quiet handyman had vanished too. The next morning, hunters found the store unlocked, and the cash register empty. Plainfield was a town that never locked its doors, until that morning. Bernice Warden's son, Deputy Frank Wardens, returned from hunting to find the hardware store silent, the floor slick with blood. The trail led out to the snow, toward Ed Gein's truck. By evening, police arrived at Ed's farmhouse. The air was still. No dogs barked. Only the wind groaned through the barn siding. Inside, they found what looked like a hunter's shed, until the lanterns came on. Then, reality split open. Masks made of human skin hung from nails. Bowls carved from skulls. Furniture upholstered in flesh. And in a back room, the remains of Bernice Wardens, hanging like game, her body mutilated with methodical care. Officers stumbled out, pale and shaking. One whispered, "We're standing in hell." When they found Ed, he didn't run. He didn't fight. He just blinked slowly and said, "She's in the house, isn't she?" He sounded relieved. That night, Plainfield lost its innocence. And the man everyone thought was odd but harmless became the face of evil itself. But to Ed, it wasn't murder. It was a reunion. When they brought him into custody, Ed Gein didn't protest. He looked confused, almost gentle, as if someone had caught him sleepwalking. "I didn't kill her," he said softly. "She's still alive, just different now." At the sheriff's office, investigators questioned him for hours. The more they pressed, the calmer he became. He spoke about digging up graves like other men go fishing, about crafting suits from skin so he could feel closer to his mother. Detectives were torn between disgust and disbelief. One finally asked, "Ed, why would you do something like that?" He smiled faintly. "I never hated them. I just wanted them home." When they tallied the evidence, the truth emerged. Ed Gein had murdered two women, Mary Hogan and Bernice Wardens. The rest of the horrors in his home came from his countless grave visits, at least 40 cemeteries, disturbed under moonlight. The next day, police sealed off his farmhouse. Reporters flooded Plainfield, calling it a museum of horror. Neighbors stood outside in silence, refusing to look toward the hill where his house stood. As Ed sat in his cell, humming quietly to himself, the sheriff leaned over and whispered, "You'll burn for this, Gein." Ed only shrugged. "Ma said I'd never feel the fire." And somehow, he believed it. By 1958, Ed Gein had become a national nightmare. Reporters from Chicago to New York called him the Butcher of Plainfield. But when the trial began, what stood out wasn't rage, it was stillness. Ed sat quietly, hands folded, eyes down. He didn't look like a monster. He looked like a man who'd gotten lost somewhere between grief and delusion. Doctors testified that he suffered from severe psychosis, unable to tell fantasy from memory. He doesn't understand death, one psychiatrist said. To him, bodies are just vessels. Only 2 murders could be proven, but the evidence from his farmhouse suggested something larger, a mind that blurred the line between resurrection and desecration. When asked if he killed Bernice Wardens, Ed replied, "I don't remember. I was at the house, but Ma was talking to me. She told me to do it." He was found not guilty by reason of insanity and sent to the Central State Hospital for the criminally insane. There, he tended gardens, read magazines, and smiled at nurses who never quite met his gaze. They said he was polite, gentle, even. But sometimes, at night, he'd stare into his reflection, as if expecting another face to stare back. And when asked what he missed most about home, Ed answered quietly, her voice. The house was never quiet when she was there. Inside the hospital walls, Ed Gein lived in a strange peace. He'd paint, garden, even joke with orderlies. The doctors said he was cooperative. But when the sessions turned to his crimes, his voice grew soft, almost tender. "I didn't mean harm," he'd whisper. "I just wanted Ma back. She hated sinners, and I wanted to help her clean the world." To most, he was delusional. To himself, he was devoted. He believed the bodies he unearthed weren't desecrated, they were preserved, kept safe from decay, from forgetting. His journals were filled with sketches, women's faces, motherly figures, anatomical drawings, and handwritten prayers. Sometimes he'd cross out God's name and write Augusta instead. He loved her, one psychiatrist said, in a way that destroyed everything else. Over time, the staff noticed something eerie. Ed never expressed guilt. Only longing. Like a child still waiting to be forgiven. When a reporter once asked if he missed Plainfield, Ed smiled faintly. "I still hear it," he said. "The wind through the cornfields, and Ma calling my name." He paused, eyes distant. "She always finds me. Even here." Ed Gein died in 1984, quietly, of heart failure, after nearly 3 decades in a mental institution. The nurses said he was calm in his final days, humming old hymns, staring out the window as if watching someone approach. Plainfield never recovered. The town buried his house in fire, literally. In 1958, before auction day, it mysteriously burned to the ground. Locals called it divine justice. No one tried to save it. No one wanted to. But Ed's shadow didn't die with him. His story inspired Psycho's Norman Bates, Texas Chainsaw Massacre's Leatherface, and Silence of the Lambs' Buffalo Bill. 3 fictional killers, all born from one lonely man who loved his mother too much. To psychologists, he remains a case study in isolation, grief, and the collapse of morality under devotion. To storytellers, he's proof that real horror doesn't need monsters, just human need twisted beyond repair. He wasn't a creature of rage. He was a man who tried to stitch love back together, and tore humanity apart in the process. He wasn't born evil. He simply never learned how to let go. He wasn't a monster from birth. He was a man who lost his reflection, and started collecting others instead. Don't forget to like this video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more true crime stories that reveal the minds behind the madness.